stuff. This is because I believe in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I thought these guys ought to get at least as good a shot at it as I have, because it's the thing that saved my life. And I have made it my life since that time to make sure that that next guy gets the same, better than even shot that I got. I got into a good group. I got 12 steps in. And that's how I still believe it's the best. It's the best. I was back there middle of March. They got 9 members in their group now. And they meet in a church. They don't meet in nobody's home. And they're still reading the book, and they're still going until everybody's done. And we didn't get out of there till 11:30. That one night they did change the night of the meeting, which I thought was a bad deal, but okay. So, but that's how maybe one example of how group conscience gets going. And they're still very active in their district. Their GSR actually rotated and helped the other GSR kind of go to the meetings, especially to 2 of them. This is an interesting phenomenon, wouldn't you say? And they're helping each other. And for this old cat to be able to sit back and watch these guys taking a genuine interest in one another, it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. That's a fact.
One of the ways for me to understand the traditions, as I mentioned, is that the first one states the problem and the rest of them tell me what the solution, how to put it into play. So for me to understand it, I relate everything back to the first one. And if I can't do that, I don't understand it yet. And it usually comes out of life lessons, not intellectual stuff. The first principle of the traditions is survival. If the group doesn't survive, I'm not going to survive. And you probably won't either. That's our first basic principle. It's about survival. As a group, we must remain unified, and later on we'll even get down to where we get our purpose laid out as to what the purpose is, so there's no squabbles over it. But the whole idea of group conscience, how are we going to make that happen? On my own, I don't have much of a conscience. I have an opinion and an attitude. Yeah. And you're the same. So the first thing I have to do in order to begin to participate in a conscience, which will be good for the whole group, not just for 9 of us or 10 of us, or for me, is learn to listen. Everybody gets to say something. No matter how ridiculous it may be, everybody gets to say something. And this is why most groups' consciences are cut short, I believe, because I come knowing what it is already, and then I hear the first person say something, now I'm confused. They made a good point. Now what do I do? And then I listen to the third person. Now I'm really confused, because they made a good point too. And it's contrary to what I had in mind and what this guy had in mind. Well, I've discovered over the years, if I'll sit there and listen long enough, pretty soon a consensus begins to develop. If we talk long enough. To make group conscience work, you have to throw the vote out, please. Votes stop conscience. They put an end to discussion. That's what a vote does. We've talked about this long enough, let's quit. If you don't know what the vote's going to be before you take it, you haven't talked long enough. If you've been listening, you should know. And that's one of the things that I learned as a GSR. A good GSR, I don't just listen at my group's conscience meeting. I'm a member of my group, and I listen over coffee, and I listen when they call and bitch and moan. I've got a pretty good sense of what my group's conscience, or lack of conscience, is before I ever show up at a meeting. And that's my job as a GSR, to at least have some grasp of that. Now, if I'm truly participating in unity, I will meet with the other GSRs and say, we got this going on, how about you? And they'll share with me what they've got going on. And we have a service office. If your group's really screwed up, write GSO and have them give you the be-all, end-all answer. And you'll learn about true group conscience. You'll get a letter back that says, well, we really don't have an answer to that. But Louisiana did this, and Texas did this. Try something and let us know whether it worked or not. So I got really thoroughly involved in that. The whole idea that modifies my thinking is what's going to be best, first of all, for this group. From all what I'm hearing, what's going to be best for this group. Then, if we do that, how will what this group does affect the rest of them, and AA as a whole? What will this do 50 years from now? I don't have an answer to that, but just thinking that puts me in a different frame of mind. I don't pretend to know what's going to happen in 50 years. I don't even care. I'm not going to be here. Somebody else can handle that one. So I learned to take this home, and I'll tell you a funny story. At this time, I had 7 children, ranging from 3 to barbarians at 13 and 14. And one of them was a set of twins, which means 4 extra people in the house. Oh, they even have their own language. This was a busy place. And it finally got so busy and so noisy, we decided to have a formal group conscience about this. The topic being, what are we going to do about all this yelling and screaming and all this noise? It's driving everybody crazy. And we all had some input, and the 7-year-old came up with the best idea of all. He said we should make the screamer get up on her refrigerator and jump off on her head. That's what he said. That's the best we could have come up with, all of us. And what that led us to was a true group conscience. If you live in a house with 7 children, 2 frantic adults, and a couple dogs, it's going to be noisy. Live with it. But the fact that it got discussed, all the kids said, yeah, it's been bothering me too. And everybody began to moderate it a little bit. Became aware of each other's needs. So it worked. It was a beautiful experience. And I'm really glad I didn't have to get on the refrigerator and jump off. Because I yell louder than anybody. I've got 9:15. We got a couple directions we can go. We could break now and go to bed, which isn't a bad idea. We could go till 10 and go to bed. You can take a break and come back. I got to tell you the truth. I'm not going to make it past 10. I'm going to be lucky to make it to 9:30. Okay. What's your pleasure? Okay. We got a little to think about here through the night, so we can begin to get some discussion going in the morning and get moving. What's your pleasure again? 15 more minutes. You want to do 15 more minutes? There's 15 minutes. Go to the mic. You have a question. Go to the mic.
Okay, I tried to get Tom to ask it, but he wouldn't do it. Okay, when you talked about the group conscience and you said what's best for your group, and then what's best for the neighboring group, why are you not asking first what's best for Alcoholics Anonymous?
We have to determine what's going to be best for our group first, or we won't even belong to Alcoholics Anonymous. And we don't ask what's going to be best for the group next door. We ask how will what we do affect the group next door. It's a different question. Then how will it affect AA as a whole? And we have guidelines for that generally. Yeah, later I'll describe the group conscience process some of our groups use.
Dave Coven, alcoholic. This might be a very stupid question to some people. I'm sober almost 13 years, and I want to know what is a group conscience, because in my home group where I got sober and I spent almost the first 12 years, my home group had been around for over 36 years, and they never had a group conscience. And what they had were annual business meetings to elect officers and trusted servants of the group. And since I've been in Colorado, I'm one of those California transplants that everyone hates. No, honestly, I mean, I've had a very difficult time dealing with the group conscience and listening to what I consider the bullshit of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's really, I'd like to know what it is.
Let me take one little piece, because our group does regular inventory, which is part of the group conscience process. I'll describe just this one part of it. This is a group that I attended for a long time. We had a format that was decided by the 8 people that formed the group. That was the format. What are we going to read ahead of time? What's going to be the content of the meeting? How will this meeting be held together? And the 8 of us decided that's it, so that was it. Now, we add 3 or 4 people. If they're going to really be members of the group, they need to input that. So on a regular basis, we revisit the format. Is this still valid for this group? Or do you have some input? You want to change a little here or there? The basic idea was it was a podium call-up meeting, and you had 5 to 7 minutes. And that's all you got. And the only topic was what you were like, what happened, and what you're like now. Now, that's a good format. But as the group grew, is that still a good format? That's what the group conscience determines. Everybody gets to input it. I may think it's a good idea, but if I didn't help make the decision, I don't feel part of the group. Okay? We did one group inventory where one of our new members opened our mind, because we use the traditions as a checklist. He said, I'm a little confused here. This 5th tradition says that our primary purpose is to carry the message to the alcoholic that still suffers. And I've been coming here 6 months and we haven't gone anywhere yet. Woke us up. Okay. So we began to go to some treatment centers and some jail meetings, but the group's conscience had to come first and determine, just because we haven't, do we want to do that? That's a group conscience decision. Does this group want to participate in any given activity? That's part of the group conscience. How much money are we going to donate to our service entities, if any? Because as an AA group, you're not required to even register, and you're still an AA group, and you're not required to give any money at all, and you're still an AA group. And how much of this money is supposed to be given? Well, by the guidelines, of course, you cover all of your group expenses first, and then out of what's left over, you decide if and how much you send away. That's group conscience stuff. What percentage do we want to use? 60-30-10 is nice. 60-35, 5-10, whatever it is nice. But I belonged to another group, but as it was forming, we didn't have enough for a percentage to even, the postage would have been more. So instead, by group conscience, we budgeted X amount of each kitty to go to a donation to GSO and to the central office, and every time we got to $10, we sent that off. And it was a budget item. That was by group conscience. As the group grew, we had to change that. Okay? So we had to have another meeting for the group to decide, all right, we're in terrible shape now. We got a report this morning. We've got $100 left over. We've already sent money off to GSO. We paid our GSR's expenses to last week's assemblies, and we got $100 left over. I'm inclined not to pass the basket next week. I'm in a minority. But we're going to have a meeting to decide what to do with that $100, because our conscience says that's beyond our prudent reserve. So we must have a meeting to decide, what are we going to do here? Does that help? Those are just some examples of what I experience as group conscience. Who's going to carry the key? Yeah.
I think, too, the group can vote anything. They do. We're going to have paid babysitting on Wednesday. Bring your kids, and 2 weeks later, that fell apart. Why? Because they didn't show up. So some group members got to go back there and babysit, and then they say, the hell with this, and so they voted out next time. We vote in everything. But what do we do after we vote? We can vote to have a closed meeting, but you know what? If some non-alcoholics show up at our closed meeting, nobody says, this meeting is for alcoholics or members of Alcoholics Anonymous only. It's not really a closed meeting now. We can vote that way. But what do we as a group do with all this voting that we're doing? And that, to me, is the reflection of the true group conscience as opposed to the wannabe group conscience. Now, some of this comes about as a result of misinformation. And the only reason I believe that we pass rules is to protect ourselves from our own fears. And Alcoholics Anonymous, as such, doesn't need a lot of rules. We, as alcoholics, generally don't like a lot of rules. But the problem is, how do you get to this informed group conscience? I think we're going to talk a lot about that tomorrow. You see, the rest of the principles of the traditions are the things that help us to arrive at that informed group conscience. You know, and it's by and through our practice of the balance of the traditions, I think, that leads to that place we all want to be at. Respectively. I've seen groups do a lot of stupid things. I've seen groups do a lot of good things. But I've seen them do a lot of stupid things.
Membership in a group is important. That's what makes fellowship. That's where we're weak. We don't belong. So one of our healing things is to become part of something. You know how powerful that is. Okay? If I don't get to participate in the discussion, I don't feel like I belong. Now in my house, if you come to my house, you'll hear my 2.5-year-old granddaughter inputting what's going on in this house. She's been trained that way. Everybody has a voice. That doesn't mean I'm going to pay attention to her. She wants cookies for breakfast. Well, we compromise. She gets broccoli for breakfast because she likes broccoli too. But everybody has that input, because otherwise I don't belong. And you don't belong. And you protect me from my ego, because I got to tell you the truth. After you founded a couple groups, you know what's best for them. You can see them getting off track. And if you're not paying attention, you can drive them off track. Tom?
Can you comment on minority opinion?
Comment on minority opinion. Yes. The most important single activity in our whole process. There are a number of things that have occurred in my service life, particularly as a trustee, that still bother me to this day. But because they got a full and complete hearing, I live with them. Because I have an ace in the hole. I can wait till everything quiets down, and then I can bring it up again. Okay? Oh yeah, new bunch of folks. And I have a deep concern for some of the things going on today, and this is a good place to drop it. As long as I have participated in a full and complete discussion, I will live with whatever the group conscience is, whether I buy it or not. There are some things occurring today where I have been told we will not talk about that. You want to bet? It disturbs me that we have come from group to some area, to some general service conference items where we've been told we will not talk about that. Please pay attention. The life of Alcoholics Anonymous is on the line. Anytime we can't talk about it, we're killing ourselves. Because we are the conference. We are the area. Who the hell is this? It's you and me. And I'm just stubborn enough, if you tell me I can't talk about it, that's all we're going to talk about for a while. But the minority opinion, I've seen it swing whole votes that were critical. And a good chairperson, the ones I have admired over the years, are the ones that after the vote is taken, after everything's done, has been watching, and will pick somebody from the minority and ask them to speak to it, because they recognize a really fundamental fact. Some people can't just get up and go to that mic and express themselves. It's just not in their nature. But they can if they're asked. So we must always make sure that person gets to speak too. Whether we go along with it or not, they get to speak. I was one of those at the beginning. You couldn't get a word out of me. Now you can't shut me up. And I love this thing.
Don, you said that if it's an informed group conscience video.
She's Al-Anon. What the hell is that? This, by the way, is the Al-Anon delegate from New Mexico.
Thanks, Don. I needed that.
You said that if it's an informed group conscience, that you live with it. When I was back at conference last year, you know, after some of the votes, I heard our conference chairman say, now whether you agree with this or not, please go back and support it. I personally did not feel like I could support it. I still don't feel like I support it, so I want to know what you mean by live with it, that you can live with it.
There are a lot of things I don't support either. What I mean by live with it is that I'll keep my mouth shut for a while and then I'll bring it up again. At an appropriate time. I won't make a fool of myself anymore. I've done that often enough. But if it's wrong, it's wrong. And I found generally if I'll wait it out, it shows that this was a bad decision and it gets taken care of by itself. If not, I'm willing to stick my neck out down the road somewhere. There are things I don't support.
Then what about when you come back and you give your conference report? And part of giving my conference report is this is the stuff that happened, including the votes that didn't go right. Now, that doesn't mean I say, I personally disagree with this, and it was like total BS, and you all ought to. But, you know, I think that's just the whole deal. And then we have all this controversy and all this good stuff that happens. So,
one of the best delegates I ever saw, and I'll be talking a lot about some of the delegates.
tying it into the first edition.
Yeah. He came to the microphone at conference and he said, I personally disagree with what I'm about to say to you, but my area has asked me to bring this forward and I'm obliged to do that. And he made no more editorial comment. He had class. And he presented it and we discussed it and we all agreed with him. We didn't. But I don't have any problem as long as I don't go off on a tirade saying, I did not support this. I owe you that. I didn't vote for this, but here it is. Okay, what are we going to do with it?
I'm an alcoholic named Jim. My home group is a campus group in Boulder, Colorado. My sobriety date is November 3rd, 1991. Just want to bring us back to group conscience at the group level. My home group, and there's a couple of guys here that will witness this, just so keep me honest. We recently went through the process of having our second group inventory in 3 years. Our group has grown a lot over that time. And just about, as far as the purpose of the group conscience, one of the things I think has been a benefit for all of us, and I think those people who were there would agree with me on this, is it really gives us a chance to see what everybody there is there for. Mm-hmm. You know, that what I'm hoping to get out of that meeting may be the same thing as somebody else, but somebody else may be coming to that meeting looking for something else. And I get to come there and really find out, you know, maybe there's something else I can get out of this meeting, or what it is that I can really cause to have some benefit, and why it is that we're doing these things.
May I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
How do you get participation from your group so you get that information? How do you get them to show up for the meeting?
For the inventory, we announced it, for about 3 months beforehand, something like that. We just announced it at the meetings. A lot of sponsorship involved, of people really trying to encourage people to show up, and making it, what? Oh yeah, and we also, as talking about doing things at home, one of our, our GSR opened the meeting up to in his house, and just really just made it. And when we did it, there was some time limits on it, but it was a matter of like 4 hours, plus time to eat. And food is always a big food helps. Food helps.
Yeah, that's what we found too. We had a little potluck, and then took on a separate night from the meeting and just took whatever time was necessary. One of my favorite stories, the Denver Central office got an old curmudgeon one time. There may be 60 or 70 groups in the area. I won't mention his name. and about 6 of them are showing up for the intergroup meeting. So he started a rumor himself that at the next meeting they were going to begin the revisions of the big book. Everybody showed up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, it's Lou.
Couple quick things. I noticed that a lot of you found the service manuals and pamphlets over here. Thanks. We'll expect your $10 in the plate tomorrow. Seriously, we provided them for your use, but we only brought like 20, 25, knowing that this crowd probably has a lot of their own. So feel free to use them, or if you have one you want to look at tonight, bring it back, use it as a library, or take it, whatever. The other thing is that breakfast starts at 7 o'clock tomorrow. What time do you guys want to?
The images that we use are critically important because people react to images in different ways. In making these group conscience decisions for a group, because Bill's intent, the founder's intent, was that the doors be flung wide, the traditions are to keep the doors open, not to close them up. So one of the guiding questions is, if we make this decision, will it make it harder for an alcoholic to belong, or will it make it easier? And it really does help to modify even the best decisions. If what we do will make it hard for somebody, let's don't do it. If it'll make it easier, let's do it. Because the nice thing about what we do with any decisions we make, we can change them the next day if we don't like them. Nothing here is written in stone. These aren't rules or laws. These are guiding principles for survival. And that's what I need to keep in mind. Whether it be the survival of the AA group, the survival of my family, or last, my personal survival, because that is last. It's important, but it's last. My personal survival depends upon the group. We're in a funny situation. You realize that? Here we have groups whose survival is dependent on its members, and its members are dependent upon the survival of the group. It makes it a nice, tight little package. I don't even have to get philosophical with it. I just have to comply. That just came to me. I just wanted to add that to what we had done last night. If what we're going to do makes it easy, let's do it. If what we're going to do would make it hard for anyone to come, let's don't do it.
Hey, somebody asked me last night if we were done talking about Tradition 2. No. And Tradition 2 is going to come into the rest of these traditions. Because under one line of thinking anyway, Tradition 2 might be the solution to the problem that's been identified in Tradition 1, and the rest of the traditions, of course, help us to come to this group conscience thing. And, really when we start talking about the concepts, they're going to amplify on this tradition as well. So why don't we move on to Tradition 3, long form, which doesn't seem to say anything close to what the short form says. Our membership ought to include all who suffer from alcoholism. Hence, we may refuse none who wish to recover. Nor ought AA membership ever depend upon money or conformity. Any 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered together for sobriety may call themselves an AA group, provided that as a group they have no other affiliation. I think it was off and on through probably the last 20 years of AA history that we came up with what's an AA group, at the conference, and there was a 6-point definition. I think there was at one point a 4-point definition, and we've already had it. We've always had it. It's been the third tradition long form. And a lot of people used to like to use the 6-point definition contained in the AA group pamphlet, which this is one of, but it's really a bad example. I was telling Don before the meeting, I like this one because it's got the stuff that I like in it. They change this thing about every year or two. But anyway, and we got so consumed with defining what an AA group was and wasn't that we forgot what an AA group was, maybe.
So, but the facts are that how do you go about the business of identifying outside affiliation? Where does the line between cooperation and affiliation start and stop? Biggest example that I can think of is the groups that meet in clubs. They seem to always have some kind of hook in there that's borderline affiliation at best. And I got to tell you too. This is just from a personal experience. When I was new in sobriety, brand new, the guys that helped me, they only ever put one condition on them helping me. One. And it was that, and here's how it went. The one guy, I remember, Plumber Ray, he told me, he said, Gary said, we hope that one day when the obsession's been relieved in you, that you'll take the time to help somebody else. And what that has meant to me in my life is that there probably is only one requirement for my membership. But there's probably one big requirement for my sobriety, and that is that I got to be willing to give it away. And I know what it says in that big book about, you can't give away something you ain't got. But I'm of the belief you can't even give it if you're not willing to give it away in the first place. And it talks about that in that big book all the way through, front to back, helping somebody else. And the real joy in my life has been when I started helping somebody else, whether or not it was successful. I mean, you take a personal interest in it, obviously you really want it to be successful. But sometimes it isn't. So you don't get to pick and choose who wins and who doesn't. But I believe what Don says is true, that we have to be all-inclusive to anyone who suffers from alcoholism. That's what that tradition says. And so our doors need always be wide open. And that's our responsibility. That's personal responsibility of every one of us and every one of the people who call themselves members of Alcoholics Anonymous.
As these were being codified, there was a lot of funny stories that went along to. I remember one of my favorites, Bill was in the little office in New York, and that little bunch had a meeting place. And they called him one day and said, Bill, you got to get down here right away. We got a problem. And so he went down, and the problem was sitting on the front porch. Black transvestite in a purple dress. And he went in, and the boys were saying, it wants in here. What are we going to do? And Bill's response was, does he want to stop drinking? And the answer was, he says so. He said, then you let him in. Turned out this fellow turned out to be one of the finest 12-steppers in Alcoholics Anonymous in New York. But it's human nature to, my tribe's better than yours. And I had to jump through some hoops, so here's the hoops you have to jump through. And it's just the nature of the beast, and we must override that one. There is a requirement for membership in AA. There's no requirement at all just to show up. But there's a requirement for membership. And that's that you have a problem with alcohol that you want to do something about. Primarily that you're an alcoholic. Which puts a personal burden on me. If I'm going to live that tradition, then I am responsible when you show up to help you find out whether you're alcoholic or not. That's my job. That's the job of the fellowship, to help you identify. And the reason that I think that is a reasonable exclusion, if you will, a requirement, is that recovery is truly based on my finally identifying what my problem is. And so people shared their stories with me, and I identified with that. And pretty soon I'm saying, that sounds like me. That sounds like me. Maybe I'm a duck. I don't know. Because the other name for alcoholism is I ain't got it. I have all but one symptom, and that one keeps me from doing anything. So the conduct of AA's business affairs need to be in the hands of its memberships. We'll cover that with the first concept also. We must maintain this ourselves. We cannot depend on anybody but God. No outside sources. And outside people think differently. I'm sorry, they do. Doesn't mean they think wrongly. They think differently. Some of them are actually sane. And I don't understand them. I like to be around them, but I don't understand all that they do. My little group's meeting place is specifically so we can be available to alcoholics who can't go out and go to a meeting. They're in a correctional facility, so we meet in the basement there so they have a place to come. It's an open meeting, so from time to time we get people who do not have, they don't even know whether they're alcoholic, and almost all of them have additional problems today. They're in there because they got caught using and selling drugs. And we're trying to help them sort it out, but they can show up at the meeting. It's an open meeting. When we have a business meeting, these are not members of our group. They're not allowed to vote. They don't have a voice. They're transients. And they're more than welcome in our recovery meeting, but the conduct of our business has to fall in the hands of our group. Or the group itself will weaken, and then it won't be there for them. And it sounds harsh sometimes, but it's a reality. I've lived through groups who, God, I can remember some terrible times when somebody had a personal agenda, so they went out and rounded up all their buddies from other groups on group conscience night and came in and outvoted everybody. I've seen that happen. And then you never see them again. So we take a quick vote and rectify it the next week, but it messes things up. And I think the most lovely part of the whole thing is the one that says, I don't have to comply, and my group doesn't have to comply with any edicts from anybody. Any two or more alcoholics gathered for sobriety may call themselves an AA group, provided they have no other affiliation and they're self-supporting. I don't have to register with GSO. Don't have to donate any money to anything. Like, we can be a pain in the ass to everybody, and we're still an AA group. And I can still be an AA member even if I don't meet your standards or qualifications. And with that, I tend to comply with your standards and qualifications. It's just if you tell me I have to, the hell I do. It's the nature of the beast. Okay. How do you become a member of other groups? This applies to other groups. A group is two or more people. Well, that includes my marriage then, my partner. It includes my children. Would you like to be a member of my family? Come to dinner. That's the only requirement. You know, that's where families get things done, in case you haven't noticed it. It's the dinner table. The rest of the time we're all too busy doing things. So come to dinner. You may decide you don't want to be a member of this family. Okay? Sometimes part of my family are Catholic, and sometimes some of them are heathens. And so if you're looking for structure at my dinner table, you got some of them doing this and some of them doing this. But we all eat the same food. My grandson loves that, because I don't do this and he does, and he knows I'm praying with him, and he doesn't understand how come he has to do this and I don't. And I'm going to wait till he asks for me. To be a member of anything, I must know, and the group must know, and the rest of the traditions will help us determine what's the purpose here, what are we doing here, who belongs here and who doesn't. And this one addresses who belongs here and who doesn't. And we don't even decide whether you're alcoholic or not. If you say you are, you are. Now, it may be a lie. I don't care. If I'm doing my job along the way, we'll find that out. I do have a problem with people who come to AA expecting to be members because they want to stop drinking buttermilk. There's been a weakening. The desire to stop drinking means alcohol. If we're going to have a place where alcoholics show up and can identify, because that's what that's about, where new people can come and bring their problems. which is always alcoholism. Having an open group has been interesting for us because through a big book workshop where a bunch of Al-Anon showed up and went through the steps and had the same experience we had, they started coming to our meeting too. And this became fun. It became interesting. It became a bone of contention. After all, I don't know about you guys, but you seem to talk more than we do, and I didn't think that was possible. And it was good for our group because in a meeting with the Al-Anon participants there participating, we had a group conscience as to what the participation level was. We do not let them put money in our basket. It's not correct. We're self-supporting. They don't have a vote in business matters of that group. They're more than willing to attend. All we ask is that you confine any comments to what we're talking about, which will be a step, a tradition, or a concept. So we got to dialogue, and our friendships became deeper. One person never came back. Okay. The rest of them, our friendships were deeper. And I believe in both open and closed meetings. Those are things that group conscience decided along the way. The tradition says 2 or more alcoholics gathered. That makes an AA meeting. Whether it's open or closed, it's up to the group. In this little pamphlet, one of the things I like in there, it defines who participates in an open meeting also. Whoever the group decides participates. An open meeting is for people who want to find out about alcoholism and AA, and the group decides who participates. That's lovely. GSO doesn't decide that. I don't decide that. The group decides that. Is that consistent with unity? It is for me. It's clear cut. It's a loving way to handle it, and I think we have to be very loving because we're delicate. Get more delicate with time, don't we? And why are we gathered? This clearly says why we gather. For sobriety. There's no other reason for us to gather. I have nothing against golf. I truly don't. At the 10th hole, I wonder why we didn't stop at 9, but I have nothing against it. But that's not AA. So there's no AA golf tournaments. There are AAs who participate in golf tournaments. There's no AA bowling leagues. That's not why we gather. There's no AA softball leagues. There are AAs who have softball leagues. I think it's a wonderful activity, but that's not why we gather for AA. We gather for sobriety. And I don't believe dances and softball will keep me sober. I believe I can dance and play softball because I am. But if I'm a sick, hurt, and drunk, Jesus, don't ask me to play softball. I'm trying to figure out how not to take a drink this afternoon. That's why we gather. I belonged to a group in North Platte one time where the old-timers who understood this, Jim Griffin, kind of set the pattern. And this group went through a step a week. It was a good meeting. But they had noticed that a lot of times when new people came, it'd break off that continuum and they'd have a first step meeting. And because it was an active group, we seldom ever got past the third step. So by group conscience, what this group did, I found it lovely, was when somebody new came, and they were almost always brought by someone, 5 or 6 members of the groups would break off and go into a separate room and 12-step have a first step meeting. So the group could continue on with its format, and these people got what they came here for. If we're at the 8-step, and I'm fresh and new, and I come to your meeting, I don't want to hear that shit. Half of why I'm drinking yesterday is that I'm afraid that's going to catch up with me. And you're telling me I got to go see him? Bye. Okay. But those are just little things that we've done in order to maintain this, and it's a tightrope, and it takes a lot of prayer to keep the door open and yet not dilute what we're all about. I must always remember, and it's not hard because I was one of the desperate ones that had died just before I got here, that whatever my group's doing, it must be geared to the person who walks in that is that close to death. The rest of it is fluff. The Ulysses group, I love the Ulysses group. Paul Johnson came over.